There are truths so dangerous, people would rather bury them alive than let them out. And there are lies that are protected by the very walls of the church and by prayers. Have you ever believed in something so completely, you were willing to stake your entire life on it? I did. I believed I was part of God's divine plan. Until 1987, the year I was 35, the year I committed an unforgivable sin, I did the exact thing they always preached. I read the Bible for myself, and what I found made my world collapse. My name is Maggie, a 72-year-old woman from Dallas, Texas, and I was cast out by my own church simply for seeking the truth. Today, for the first time in more than 20 years, I'm going to tell you why. I believe I'm not alone. Our voices need to be heard. So, let me know. Where are you listening to this story from? Leave a short comment. Our connection is our strength. And please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to help me share this story even further. Thank you. It was 1972 when two ladies knocked on the door of my house one Saturday morning. I was barely 20 years old, had been married for 2 years to Robert, my first boyfriend, a good man who worked at an auto parts factory here in Dallas. We lived in a simple little house in Richardson, but it was our little corner. It always smelled of freshly brewed coffee and Downy fabric softener that I loved to use. When those two women, one older and another my age, asked me if I wouldn't like to know the truth about God, something inside me became interested. I was always a very spiritual person, my dear ones. My mother raised me Methodist, but I felt something was missing. You know, like there were questions that no one could answer. They were called Sister Esther and Sister Sophia. Sister Esther was about 45 years old, with gray hair always pulled back in a perfect bun. She wore dresses to the knee and closed shoes even in the Texas heat. Sister Sophia was young like me, newly married too, with a sweet smile that conquered me instantly. They spoke with such conviction, my loves. They explained the Bible in a way that made so much sense that I thought, how has no one ever taught me this before? We started Bible studies every Tuesday at 2 p.m. I would prepare some coffee, serve some homemade cornbread that I made, and we would sit there at my little table in the living room, studying those colorful little books they brought. Robert was initially a bit suspicious, but then he began to participate too. He was a simple man, didn't talk much, but when the sisters explained about paradise on earth, about how there would be no more war, no more death, no more pain, I saw his eyes shine. In 6 months, we were both attending the Kingdom Hall. The Kingdom Hall was located in a large adapted house in East Dallas, with that characteristic smell of waxed floors and new books. It had about 60 chairs lined up, a small stage in front where there was a dark wood podium. The walls were painted an immaculate white and adorned with sober illustrations from the Watchtower magazine, always reflecting reverential order and silence. It was there that I met the Thompson family, the family that would transform my existence. Mr. James Thompson, the patriarch, was a man of about 50 years with a distinguished bearing and impeccably combed hair. He always wore a dark suit, even on the hottest Texas days. His wife, Mrs. Linda Thompson, was an elegant lady with a soft voice and perpetual smile. They had 3 small children, exemplary in their behavior. They were considered a model family within the congregation. Mr. James radiated natural authority. When he spoke during meetings, everyone kept silent to listen. He knew the Bible by heart, quoting verses without hesitation and explaining complex prophecies with a simplicity that amazed me. I thought, this man truly possesses God's Holy Spirit. Our lives changed radically. We stopped celebrating birthdays and Christmas. The 4th of July became sin. We broke contact with relatives who didn't accept the truth. I lost childhood friends who labeled me a fanatic. But I didn't care. I was convinced I was on the right path. The Jehovah's Witnesses organization taught us that the world was dominated by Satan and that only Jehovah's Witnesses would be saved in Armageddon. After a year of study, in 1973, I was baptized. I remember as if it were yesterday, I entered that improvised pool in the assembly hall. Brother James baptized me, and when I came out of the water, I felt reborn. I was absolutely sure I belonged to God's people. Robert, my husband, was baptized 3 months later. Our routine was intense. Meeting Tuesday nights, meeting Thursday nights, meeting Sunday mornings. Saturdays in the morning we went out to preach from house to house. I came to dedicate 20 hours a week to the organization's activities, and I loved every minute. I felt I was serving Jehovah, that I was saving lives by bringing the truth to people. In 1975, when the organization announced that Armageddon was imminent, we acted on pure faith. We took our life savings money we had carefully set aside for a down payment on a larger home and decided to use it to support ourselves while dedicating our lives completely to preaching. After all, why build treasures on earth if the end was so close? After all, why accumulate treasures on earth if the end was so close? Many brothers did the same. We stopped making plans for the future. Some families didn't even enroll their children in school. But 1,975 passed, and nothing happened. The organization explained that there had been an adjustment in understanding. Some brothers got discouraged, some even left, but I maintained my faith. I thought, God has His times, not ours. Those were beautiful years. I'm not going to lie to you. I felt loved, protected, part of a worldwide family. At district assemblies, I met brothers from everywhere, united by the same faith, treating each other with love. It was exciting to sing those songs, listen to the talks that strengthened my faith, see the Bible dramas that taught us profound lessons. I became an auxiliary pioneer, then a regular pioneer. I spent 90 hours a month preaching from house to house. I directed Bible studies, helped new sisters, participated in cleaning the Kingdom Hall. I was respected in the congregation, considered an example of dedication. Brother James always praised me in meetings, saying I was an exemplary sister. Robert also progressed. He became a ministerial servant, then an elder. We were at the peak of our spiritual life. We had lost a lot, family, friends, opportunities, but we had gained a spiritual family that seemed to compensate for everything. But you know how it is, my dear ones. Sometimes appearances deceive. And it was just when I felt most secure in the truth that the first cracks began to appear in that apparent perfection. It was 1982 when a lady named Grace arrived in our religious community. She was in her 40s, newly arrived in Dallas from rural East Texas. She was different from the others. She asked questions that troubled me because I didn't have the answers. During the Watchtower study, she raised concerns about matters that had never occurred to me. Why do only 144,000 go to heaven if Jesus said that in His Father's house there are many rooms? Why has the organization changed its interpretation about 1,914 so much if it was supposedly a divine revelation? Her questions forced me to reflect, and that scared me. I had always been taught to trust the organization, not to question, to accept that the light was getting brighter with each doctrinal adjustment. But Grace's doubts planted a small seed of uncertainty inside me. Brother Daniel, one of the elders, noticed that Grace was causing division and began giving public counsel about trusting the organization, about not questioning Jehovah's arrangements. Grace was labeled as a bad influence, and sisters were urged to limit their contact with her. I felt divided. On one hand, I wanted to be obedient to the organization. On the other, Grace's questions made sense. I began to pay more attention to the studies, to read the biblical references she mentioned. And that's when I started noticing small inconsistencies that previously went unnoticed. For example, the organization taught that only they had the correct interpretation of the Bible. But I realized that many biblical texts spoke directly to the heart without needing any interpretation. Jesus said simple things like, "Come to me, all you who are weary." Why did that require the organization's interpretation? Another strange sign was what happened to my neighbor, Mr. William. He was a good man, hard-working, treated his wife and children with affection, helped anyone who needed it. But when I offered him a Bible study, he politely declined. He said he had his faith and was happy that way. According to the teachings, he would be destroyed in Armageddon along with all the wicked. How could God destroy such a good person just because he didn't become a Jehovah's Witness? Those doubts grew little by little, like a thread that's pulled and gradually unravels the fabric. But I pushed them to the back of my mind. I forced myself to trust the organization. After all, where else would I go? That was the question they always asked when doubts arose. Where else are you going to go? Only we have the truth. In 1995, something impacted me deeply. A young woman from the congregation, Sister Patricia, barely 20 years old, needed a blood transfusion after a car accident. Her parents, following the organization's teachings, prohibited the procedure. Patricia died. At the funeral, Brother Daniel spoke about how she had been faithful unto death and had won the crown of life. Everyone cried and said she was in paradise. But I couldn't help thinking, did God really want a 20-year-old woman to die for not accepting blood? In the Bible, Jesus healed on the Sabbath, breaking Jewish law, and said that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Wouldn't the same principle apply to the blood issue? Those questions tormented me, my dear ones. I prayed, asked Jehovah, to take those doubts from my heart. I thought it was my weakness, Satan's temptation. I increased my preaching hours even more, participated in more activities. I tried to immerse myself so deeply in the routine that there would be no space to think. Life kept me so busy that I didn't have time to stop and reflect. But destiny, or perhaps providence, had prepared something that would change the course of everything. But I started noticing strange things. Brother James always requested to accompany young women alone during home visits. He argued that he had experience in counseling young people with problems. Mrs. Linda Thompson always agreed, saying her husband had a special gift for guiding them. Several young women began having special meetings with Brother James. He said they were deeper Bible studies, preparation for community service, things like that. These meetings always occurred when their families weren't present, in discreet places, the congregation library, a room at the back of his house. The first to seek me out was Ashley, a 17-year-old girl I had known since childhood. She came to my house crying, saying she needed to talk to me but was afraid. With great effort, she told me that Brother James was doing inappropriate things during the special studies. I was frozen. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. A congregation elder, a servant of God, doing something like that? Impossible. But Ashley was devastated. She wasn't making anything up. She told me details that I prefer not to repeat, but that left me with an oppressed heart and a rage I had never felt. I told her we should tell the other congregation leaders that this couldn't remain like this. But she grabbed my arm desperately. "Please don't do it." He said that if I told anyone, they would disfellowship me for slandering a man of God. He said no one would believe me, and I would lose my family forever. That's when I began to understand the magnitude of the problem. Brother James wasn't just abusing young women, he was using the congregation's own structure to silence them. And what was worse, he wasn't the only one. In the following days, other young women came to me, Emily, Hannah, Sarah, all with similar stories, all terrified of the idea of speaking, all convinced they would be punished if they reported. I couldn't sleep. How was it possible for this to happen in a congregation that called itself pure, directed by God? How could men who went up to the platform to give talks about morality be doing those horrible things to innocent girls? It was then that I realized the time had come to act. I couldn't remain silent anymore. I couldn't keep protecting the congregation's reputation while innocent girls were being violated. I decided to speak with Brother Daniel, tell him everything, demand that something be done, and that's exactly what I did. The following Tuesday, after the meeting, I asked to speak with Brother Daniel privately. My heart was beating hard, my hands were sweating cold. I knew that what I was going to say would change everything, but I had no choice. We sat in the congregation library, that small room in the back full of religious books. Brother Daniel looked at me with his usually serene face. With great fear, I approached the office of Brother Daniel, my longtime confidant, and asked him, "What's worrying you, Sister Margaret? I notice you've been somewhat down lately." I took a deep breath and began to tell him everything. I told him about the young women who had come to me. about Brother James's acts and how they suffered in silence. With each word I spoke, I watched Brother Daniel's face transform, first surprise, then concern, and finally an expression I couldn't understand. When I finished, we remained in silence for a few minutes that felt like hours. He drummed his fingers on the desk, looked at the floor, sighed deeply, until he finally spoke. "Sister Margaret, these are very serious accusations. Are you sure of what you're telling me?" I confirmed that yes. I explained that the girls were devastated and that we should protect them. Then he said something that shocked me. "Look, sister, Brother James is a man of God, an exemplary elder. Sometimes young women can misinterpret gestures of paternal affection. Maybe that's what happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Brother Daniel," I said, "this isn't about misinterpretation. These were specific and detailed acts that these young women would never invent." But he shook his head. "Sister, you know we can't accept accusations against an elder without the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. It's written in Timothy. Besides, we must protect our congregation's reputation." At that instant, I understood he wasn't going to do anything. He was more concerned about the congregation's image than about the young women who had suffered abuse. I insisted, argued, almost begged, but he remained firm. "Let it pass, sister. Pray to Jehovah. Trust in the organization. If there's something wrong, Jehovah will resolve it in his time." I left that meeting devastated. How was it possible that a man I respected so much, whom I considered an example of devotion, could be so insensitive? How could he prefer to protect an aggressor instead of protecting the victims? In the following days, I did something I had never done before. I began to actively question the doctrines. If the organization was wrong about this, what else was it wrong about? I began to read the Bible without the organization's interpretations, just the pure Bible. And that's when my life took a complete turn, my dear ones. Reading only the Bible, without the organization's filters, I began to see things I had never noticed before. Jesus spoke about love, forgiveness, and freedom. Paul wrote about God's grace, about how salvation was a gift, not something earned through works. John said that God was love, period. But the Jehovah's Witnesses organization taught something different. It taught that only those who were part of it would be saved, that salvation depended on service hours, meeting attendance, total obedience to the organization, that questioning was sin, that doubting was lack of faith. I began to note these differences in a notebook I hid in the back of the closet. Each verse I read without the organization's filter seemed to reveal a new truth that had been distorted or hidden. For example, Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." He didn't say, "Come to the organization." Paul wrote that by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works. But the organization taught that salvation depended on works, services, obedience. The more I read, the more evident it became that many Jehovah's Witnesses doctrines had no biblical basis or, worse, directly contradicted what the Bible taught. I tried to share some of these discoveries with Robert, but he became alarmed. "Margaret," he said, "you're starting to sound like an apostate. That's dangerous. You must trust the organization, stop questioning." But I couldn't stop. It was like having discovered a treasure map and not being able to resist the search. Scripture was freeing me from dogmas that had bound me for years. I started noticing certain inconsistencies in the community. Brother David, the circuit overseer, drove a new Ford F-150, wore expensive suits, and his family went on vacations to places we common publishers couldn't afford. When I discreetly asked how he did it with the allowance he received, they told me that Jehovah's blessing rewarded the faithful. I discovered he received substantial donations from congregation members grateful for his spiritual guidance. Some elder body decisions were influenced by those who contributed most to the Kingdom Hall. The institution I thought was guided by God's Spirit was actually directed by men with very earthly motivations. And Brother James continued with his special visits to young women. The girls continued suffering in silence, and I felt increasingly suffocated by knowing the truth and not being able to do anything. It was then that I made a decision that would change my life forever. I decided to speak publicly about what I was discovering. One Sunday during the Watchtower study, the topic was submission to the organization. When they gave me the opportunity to comment, I said, "Brothers, have you ever wondered why Jesus told his disciples, 'Don't call anyone teacher on earth, because only one is your teacher, the Christ'? Why then do we call the organization Mother and obey it as if it were infallible?" The silence was sepulchral. Brother Daniel looked at me with an expression of absolute bewilderment. Other brothers murmured among themselves. I continued, "And why did Jesus say that we would know the tree by its fruits, but when we see rotten fruits in the organization, we're encouraged to ignore them and trust blindly?" It was then that Brother Daniel interrupted, "Sister Margaret, this isn't the appropriate time or place. We'll talk after the meeting." But I had already gone too far to stop. "Brother Daniel, Jesus said that the truth would make us free. If we're in the truth, why do we fear questions? Why are we afraid of Scripture itself?" The meeting ended in a tense atmosphere. Several brothers left without speaking to me. Others looked at me with pity, as if I were unbalanced. Brother Daniel asked my husband Robert and me to stay. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. "Sister Margaret," he said, "it's evident that you're being influenced by apostate thinking. These questions you're asking are typical of those who have left the truth. You need to stop immediately, or you'll face a judicial committee." Robert begged me to apologize, to promise I wouldn't question again. But something inside me had changed forever. I had tasted true freedom that comes from knowing God directly through His Word, without human intermediaries. "Brother Daniel," I said, "answer one thing. If the organization has the truth, why does it fear my questions? If it's right, it should be easy to show me where I'm wrong using only Scripture." He didn't answer. He simply said I had 1 week to retract or face a judicial committee. I left there knowing that my life as a congregation member was coming to an end, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The following week was the longest of my life. Robert barely spoke to me. He said I was destroying our family, our reputation, our spiritual life. The brothers avoided me on the street, murmured when they saw me pass. A few, including Sister Grace, who had planted the first seeds of doubt, discreetly sought me out to confess that they also had questions. But it was the visit from Ashley, that young woman who first told me about Brother James's abuses, that gave me the final push I needed. She came to my house one afternoon with her face soaked in tears. "Sister Margaret," she said between sobs, "he did it again. Brother James invited me to a special meeting about my spiritual progress and did it again. When I tried to resist, he threatened that Jehovah would punish me for disrespecting an elder. At that instant, something inside me broke. It was no longer about doctrine, biblical interpretations, or organizational structures. It was about an innocent girl being violated in God's name by a man who should protect her. "Ashley," I said, taking her hands in mine, "this is going to end today, no matter what happens to me." That night, I wrote a 15-page letter. I documented every detail: Brother James' abuses, Brother Daniel's omission as congregation elder, the doctrinal inconsistencies I had discovered, the contradictions between the organization's teachings and the Bible. I made copies to send to the governing body in Brooklyn, New York, to the service department, to other congregations in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But before sending them, I decided to make one last attempt. Saturday morning, field service day, instead of going door to door, I went directly to the Kingdom Hall. I knew the elders met before field service. I entered the room where Brother Daniel, Brother James, and Brother Michael, the third elder, were, and placed my letter on the table. "Brothers," I said, "you have two options. Either you address these matters honestly, protect these girls, and seriously investigate these abuses, or I'll make sure copies of this letter reach every congregation in Texas." Brother James turned pale. Brother Daniel turned red with fury. Brother Michael just shook his head sadly. "Sister Margaret," Brother Daniel said with a trembling voice, "you know that threatening elders is a serious matter. You're acting like an apostate. This is dangerous territory." "Threatening?" I replied. "It's asking for justice for innocent girls who are being abused while you look the other way." It was then that Brother James finally spoke, with a voice I had never heard from him, low and menacing. "Sister Margaret, you're playing with fire. You know that bringing accusations against elders without proper witnesses is serious. This could affect your standing before Jehovah." "Accusations?" I said, and my voice came out louder than I intended. "I have 5 young girls willing to testify about what you've done to them. That's not accusation, it's testimony." Brother Michael, who until that moment had remained silent, sighed deeply and said, "Margaret, even if some of these matters have occurred, you must understand that we can't destroy the congregation's peace and the organization's reputation because of isolated incidents." Isolated incidents? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We're talking about sexual abuse of minors. How can you sleep at night knowing this is happening right under your noses? It was then that Brother Daniel hit the table with his fist. "Enough. You're clearly being influenced by Satan, Sister Margaret. There's no more discussion. You'll face a judicial committee this week, and I can assure you that you'll be disfellowshipped for apostasy." I took my letter from the table and looked at those 3 men I had respected and admired for so many years. At that instant, I saw them as they really were, not servants of God, but corrupt men protecting their own interests. "Do you know what apostasy really is?" I asked with serenity. "It's about moving away from God." But actually, I felt closer to Him than ever. Reading the scriptures without your manipulations. You are the ones who have distanced yourselves by protecting abusers and silencing victims. I left that office knowing there was no turning back. In the afternoon, I sent the certified letters, and at nightfall, I told Robert everything. He listened in silence, and when I finished, he only said, "Margaret, you've destroyed our life. We'll lose everything. Our spiritual family, our friends, our reputation." "Why? Why couldn't you just trust the organization?" "Why?" I replied. "When you see a child being hurt and you have the ability to help, you do it even if it costs you everything." The following Thursday, my judicial committee was held. 3 elders from neighboring congregations to avoid conflicts of interest. They had already decided my fate even before I entered the Kingdom Hall. They asked questions about my rebellious attitude, about my doctrinal doubts, about my lack of submission to the organization. When I tried to speak about the abuses, they interrupted me, saying that wasn't a topic to address in that meeting. "Sister Margaret," said the presiding elder, "are you repentant for questioning Jehovah's organization? Are you willing to stop sowing doubts and return to being a loyal witness?" I looked at those 3 men and felt an unexpected peace. Brothers, I can't repent for reading the Bible. I can't repent for questioning when I see injustices. And I can't repent for protecting innocent children. If that's apostasy, then yes, I'm an apostate. The decision was unanimous, disfellowshipping for apostasy. The following Tuesday, the announcement was made in the meeting. Margaret Thompson is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Done. 15 years of my life erased in one sentence. But do you know what happened when I left the Kingdom Hall for the last time as a member? 5 young girls were waiting for me outside. Ashley, Emily, Hannah, Sarah, and a 5th I didn't even know had been assaulted, all crying, all thanking me for having the courage to speak. "Sister Margaret," Ashley said, "you saved us." After they knew you were going to tell everything, Brother James stopped. He's even being transferred to another congregation. At that moment, my dear ones, I knew I had done the right thing. It cost me my spiritual family, my marriage, my friends, my reputation. But I saved 5 girls from continuing to be abused. The first days after disfellowshipping were the most difficult of my life. Those who have never been Jehovah's Witnesses might not fully understand. But when you're disfellowshipped, it's as if you die to all your family and friends who remain in the organization. Robert tried to endure for a few weeks, but the pressure was too much. The elders called him for encouraging visits where they made it clear that his spirituality was at risk for remaining married to me. He received casual visits from brothers asking if he wasn't thinking of separating to protect his position in the congregation. A month after my disfellowshipping, he came home and said, "Margaret, I love you, but I can't anymore. Either you return to the organization, ask for forgiveness, and stop this rebellion, or our life together ends here. I knew this moment would come, but it still hurt like a stab in the chest. 15 years of marriage, a life built together, shared dreams, all destroyed by an organization that claimed to represent the God of love. "Robert," I said, "I can't pretend I don't know what I know. I can't go back to being complicit in abuses and lies and manipulation that I witnessed. If you choose the organization instead of me, I'll understand, but I won't change my mind." He packed his bags that same night. 22 years of life together ended in a 10-minute conversation. I lost much more than my husband. I lost my sister, who was a witness, and began treating me as if I were invisible. I lost friends of decades who could no longer speak to me. I lost my social identity, my support network, my life structure. Financially, it was devastating. As a housewife, I had no career, no professional qualifications. At 35 years old, I found myself alone, without money, without prospects, living in a little house I could barely afford. But the worst were the nights. After spending 15 years with an intense routine of meetings, field service, and studies, I suddenly found myself with an enormous void. I didn't know what to do with my time. I didn't know how to relate to people in the world. I didn't even know what it was like to live without the organization's structure. There were moments, I'm not going to lie to you, when I thought about returning. Not because I believed in the organization, but because the loneliness was suffocating. Doubt attacked me. What if I'm wrong? What if it really is apostasy to question? What if I lose my salvation because of my pride? It was in those most difficult moments that the Bible became my greatest comfort. Not the Bible interpreted by the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, but God's pure word speaking directly to my heart. Verses like, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake," took on new meaning. If the world hates you, know that it hated me first. Jesus was speaking exactly about situations like mine. I began attending a small Baptist church in my neighborhood in Richardson, not because I wanted to convert, but because I needed Christian fellowship with people who also loved God. The difference was impressive, my dear ones. In that church, people asked questions, discussed verses, expressed doubts without fear of being disfellowshipped. The pastor encouraged questioning. He said God wasn't afraid of our questions. What a contrast with what I had lived. Little by little, I rebuilt my life. I went back to school, took a course as a medical assistant. I began working at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, caring for people, feeling that I was finally serving God in a genuine way, not knocking on doors to convert, but alleviating human suffering. The 5 young women I had protected maintained secret contact with me. They couldn't speak to me publicly, but they sent letters and messages through non-witness people. They told how their lives were improving, how they were healing from the traumas. Ashley, years later, also left the organization. She sought me out crying, thanked me for having planted the seed of courage she needed to question. Today, she's a strong, independent woman, mother of 3 beautiful children she's raising free from organizational control. Before continuing this story, my dear ones, I wanted to ask you to leave in the comments where you're watching this video from. It gives me a warm feeling in my heart to know that my voice is reaching far across Texas and beyond, that I'm not speaking alone. And if this story is touching your lives, leave your like to encourage us to continue sharing these memories. Sometimes it's difficult to relive these moments, but I know it can help other people who have gone through similar situations. Months after my disfellowshipping, I received an anonymous letter that left me in shock. It was from an active witness who said he had access to internal organization information. The letter confirmed that my letters had reached the governing body in Brooklyn. A discreet investigation had been carried out, and the result was that Brother James was transferred to a congregation in Oklahoma, officially for circuit work reasons, but without any real discipline or public acknowledgement of what he had done. They simply moved him so he could continue with the same behavior, far from those who knew his true nature. Brother Daniel continued as presiding overseer, but the letter mentioned he had received a private counsel for lack of sensitivity in handling delicate matters. In other words, a warning that didn't affect his position or reputation in the slightest. It was just what I expected, but it still hurt to confirm that the organization really prioritized its image over protecting innocent children. But do you know what else that letter said? That other people had started questioning, that my letters had circulated discreetly among members of various congregations, that many people were awakening to the truth about the organization. At that instant, I understood that my disfellowshipping hadn't been in vain. The seeds were planted, the truth was spreading, and God was even using my suffering to free others. The following months were an emotional roller coaster. There were days when I woke up full of energy, feeling I had found valuable freedom. Other days, depression hit me hard, and I barely managed to get out of bed. It was during that stage when I met Mrs. Betty, a neighbor in her 60s who became my best friend and mentor. She had been a Baptist believer for decades, but never tried to convert me or pressure me. She just offered me a shoulder to lean on and ears willing to listen. "My daughter," she told me one afternoon when I was crying in her kitchen, "you've gone through what I call a spiritual death. Your entire identity, your relationships, your worldview were destroyed in one blow. It's normal to feel lost, but like every death, afterwards comes rebirth." And she was right. Little by little, I began to discover who I was outside the organization. I discovered that I liked country music, something that was discouraged within the organization. That I adored reading books on philosophy and psychology. That I had talent for cooking Texas barbecue. I began making true friendships, not based on shared religious beliefs, but on genuine affinity. People who accepted me with my doubts, my wounds, my defects. What a difference from the conditional friendships I had in the organization. My work at Parkland Hospital gave me a completely new perspective on life. Caring for sick people, witnessing births and deaths, talking with families in crisis moments, I learned about genuine compassion, not that artificial compassion we demonstrated in the congregation just to set a good example. I remember one case that marked me deeply. It was an 80-year-old man, a devout Methodist, who was hospitalized with terminal cancer. According to the Jehovah's Witnesses' teachings, he would be destroyed in Armageddon for not accepting the truth. But living with him for weeks, I saw a man of genuine faith, kind, who treated everyone with gentleness and love. One night, when he felt very bad, he asked me to pray with him. At that instant, while praying with a worldly Methodist, I felt God's presence in a more real way than I had ever felt in any Kingdom Hall meeting. It was there that I fully understood the organization's lie about having a monopoly on God. God was everywhere, working in the hearts of people of all religions and even those who followed no religion at all. I began studying the Jehovah's Witnesses organization's history independently. I read books that were forbidden by the organization. I immersed myself in research of historical documents and talked with former members who had left long ago. What I discovered shocked me even more. The organization had issued false prophecies repeatedly. Besides 1,975, there were other dates predicted for Armageddon that never came true. I found constant doctrinal changes where one year's truths became old light the next. I discovered systematic cases of sexual abuse that were covered up, not just in my congregation, but worldwide. I found out that the organization owned shares in tobacco and weapons companies, the same ones it publicly condemned. Each finding was painful because it confirmed I had wasted 15 years of my life on a lie, but it was also liberating because it reaffirmed that my decision to leave had been correct. 2 years after my disfellowshipping, something happened that changed everything for me. I received a call from a woman who identified herself as an investigative journalist. She was writing an article about sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witnesses organization and had obtained my contact through a network of former members. "Mrs. Margaret," she said, "I've heard your story through people you helped. Would you like to contribute to an article that could help other victims?" I agreed to participate, but with one condition. I wanted the 5 young women I had protected to also be heard if they so desired. 3 of them agreed to participate anonymously. The article was published in the Dallas Morning News and caused enormous impact. For the first time, the issue of abuse among Jehovah's Witnesses was discussed publicly in Texas. I received hundreds of letters from people who had gone through similar situations. mothers who discovered their daughters had been abused, former members who had been silenced, people who were questioning the organization but were afraid to speak. It was then that I realized God was calling me to a different ministry, not knocking on doors to convert people to an organization, but helping victims of religious abuse find healing and freedom. I began participating in support groups, then coordinating some of them. My house became a refuge for former members who had been disfellowshipped and rejected by their families. Some stayed with me for weeks or months while they rebuilt their lives. It was difficult work, often exhausting, dealing with deeply wounded people, helping them rebuild their identity and relationships, supporting them through depression and existential crises. But it was also the most rewarding work I had done. Each person who managed to recover, each family that reunited after years of separation because of the organization, each young person who found courage to leave before wasting decades in a lie, all this gave meaning to my suffering. I learned that my painful experience hadn't been useless. God had allowed me to go through that not to punish me, but to prepare me to help other people in similar situations. I also began studying psychology, took counseling courses, specialized in religious trauma. I wanted to be prepared to help in the best way possible. The most interesting thing is that my faith in God, far from diminishing after leaving the organization, strengthened enormously. For the first time, I had a personal relationship with God, not mediated by a human organization. I could pray directly to Him, read His Word without filters, feel His presence without needing meetings or rituals. 5 years after my disfellowshipping, my life had completely changed. I had become a counselor, coordinated 3 support groups for former Jehovah's Witnesses, and had helped more than 200 people rebuild their lives after leaving the organization. Finding comfort in the midst of suffering, being an instrument of healing, that was, for me, serving God in an authentic way. My support groups grew so much that I needed to rent larger spaces. People came from other states to participate in the meetings. We created an informal communication network among former members that extended throughout the American Southwest. It was through that network that I met David, a 45-year-old man who had been an elder for 20 years before discovering the same truths I discovered. He had lost wife, children, house, everything, but maintained unshakable faith in God. We became close first as friends, united by the common experience of rejection and rebirth. He helped me better systematize the support work. We created educational materials, developed specific counseling techniques for religious trauma. 2 years later, we married in a simple ceremony at a Methodist church in Plano, surrounded by our new family, not of blood or religion, but of heart. Former members who had become our true brothers and sisters, united not by doctrine but by love and shared experience. With David, we set up a nonprofit organization focused on helping victims of religious abuse, not just former Jehovah's Witnesses, but people from any religion who had suffered manipulation, abuse, or control. Our work gained recognition. Universities called us to give conferences. Other states invited us for consultations. Lawyers sought us to testify in religious abuse cases. But the most exciting moment was when Ashley, that young woman who first told me about the abuses, brought her 10-year-old daughter to meet the woman who saved her mother. Looking at that innocent, healthy girl, free from the traumas that could have destroyed her mother, I knew all the suffering had been worth it. Many of the other girls I helped also rebuilt their lives. Some left the organization, others managed to fade away gradually. All kept me informed about their lives, their marriages, their children. Brother James, I discovered years later, continued with his pattern of behavior. He was transferred 2 more times for similar incidents. Finally, when a brave mother reported him to the police in Oklahoma, he was arrested and convicted. But how many other children suffered because the organization chose to protect him instead of protecting the victims? Brother Daniel eventually lost his position due to financial improprieties. Apparently, he was misappropriating congregation funds. Ironic that he was removed for stealing money but not for allowing child abuse. As for Robert, my ex-husband, he remarried within the organization. I learned that he sometimes asked about me to mutual acquaintances but never attempted direct contact. The organization had built a wall between us that seemed impassable. My sister, after 10 years without speaking to me, finally sought me out when her own teenage daughter began questioning the organization. It was a difficult reunion, full of tears and explanations, but that resulted in a precious reconciliation. Today, at 72 years old, I can say that my life has a true purpose. I no longer preach from house to house trying to convert people to a religion, but I open my house to the wounded and disoriented. I no longer distribute watchtower literature, but I share God's pure word with whoever wants to hear. My faith is stronger than ever, but it's a free, personal faith, not mediated by men who claim to be God's representatives on earth. I pray directly to the Father, read the Bible with my own understanding, feel the Holy Spirit working in me without needing organizational approval. I built a new family, truer than the previous one, people who love me not for agreeing with my religion, but for who I am. People who care about my personal well-being regardless of the doubts I harbor or the questions I ask. The organization took away 15 years of my life, my first marriage, family relationships I cherished deeply. However, even that loss was used by God to give me something even greater, the freedom to love Him truly and to serve my neighbor without expecting organizational rewards. In 2010, I received a phone call that moved me to tears. It was from a young woman named Jessica who told me, "Mrs. Margaret, you don't know me, but my mother was one of the girls you protected in the 80s. She always talks about you as the woman who saved her life." Jessica told me that her mother, Hannah, had left the organization at 25, graduated in psychology, and had dedicated her career to helping victims of sexual abuse. She always said she was inspired by Mrs. Margaret's courage. Jessica continued, "And now I want to follow the same path." Cases like that multiplied over the years. Children of women I had helped, now adults, contacted me to thank me and to continue the work of protection and healing. It was as if we had created a lineage of liberators, people dedicated to breaking cycles of abuse and manipulation. In 2015, the Jehovah's Witnesses organization faced a series of public scandals related to covering up sexual abuse. Cases coming to light in various countries, lawsuits, and million-dollar settlements. I was contacted by journalists from around the world to comment on what I had denounced decades earlier. "Mrs. Margaret," a CNN reporter told me, "you were one of the first voices to alert about these problems. How do you feel seeing your denunciations confirmed on a global scale?" I responded honestly, "I don't feel any satisfaction for being right about something so terrible. I feel sadness for all the children who could have been protected if they had listened to me at the time. But I also feel hope because finally the truth is coming to light." By then I was almost 65 years old and far from retiring. The work had expanded so much that we created an official foundation with its own headquarters in Arlington, Texas, a team of psychologists and lawyers specialized in religious abuse cases. We developed specific care protocols for different types of religious trauma, not just former Jehovah's Witnesses, but people who had suffered in authoritarian Pentecostal churches, extreme fundamentalist groups, and cult-like religious organizations. What we discovered is that the patterns of control and abuse were similar, regardless of denomination. Isolation from family and external friends, financial control, punishment for questioning, use of guilt and fear as manipulation tools, protection of abusive leaders in the name of organizational reputation. We created identification manuals for warning signs, brochures for victims' families, social reintegration programs for people who had left controlling religious groups. All based on decades of practical experience and academic study. In 2018, I was invited to speak at an international conference on religious freedom at the United Nations in New York. I never imagined, my dear ones, that a simple woman from Dallas, Texas, who was disfellowshipped from her religion for reading the Bible, would one day be speaking to diplomats from around the world about the importance of protecting children from religious abuse. In my speech, I told my story in summary form and ended with a reflection. Religious freedom cannot be used as a shield to protect abusers. The right to practice one's faith ends where a child's right to be safe begins. No doctrine, however sacred it may be considered, justifies the suffering of innocents. The repercussion was immense. I received invitations to speak at universities, seminaries, and conferences. My story, that which marked me as an apostate, became a mandatory case study in psychology, sociology of religion, and human rights faculties across America. But what filled my soul most, more than academic recognitions or institutional awards, was knowing that each month dozens of people found in stories like mine the courage to escape abusive situations. I received correspondence like this. Dear Mrs. Margaret, I saw your interview on a podcast and for the first time understood that it wasn't normal for my Bible study group to forbid me to speak with my family. I managed to leave, and today I'm rebuilding my life. Thank you for illuminating this path. Or this. Dear Margaret, I'm the daughter of former Jehovah's Witnesses who left after reading about your experience. Today I'm 25 years old. I'm a therapist, and I specialize in victims of religious manipulation. I want you to know that your courage didn't just save the girls of your era, but future generations. Technology became our best ally in this mission. We created a website with free resources, online support forums, and weekly virtual seminars. During the 2020 pandemic, when many found themselves confined with families obsessed with organizational control, our virtual groups became lifelines for hundreds of victims. One of the stories that moved me most was that of a 19-year-old young woman named Madison. She came from a third-generation Jehovah's Witnesses family, grandparents, parents, all the relatives in the organization. She began questioning when she witnessed how elders covered up a case of harassment within the congregation. Mrs. Margaret, she told me during a video call, I read your book and understood that I'm not crazy, that it's valid to doubt when one sees an injustice. But I'm very afraid. If I leave, I'll lose my entire family, my friendships, my job at my uncle's auto repair shop. How did you have the courage? I explained what I learned over the years. My child, courage isn't the absence of fear, but doing what's right despite fear. And remember, you don't lose a true family, you discover who really loves you without conditions. Madison took 2 years to make the decision, but finally left. It was hard, as it always is. She lost contact with her parents, siblings, and some friends. But today, 3 years later, she's a criminal justice graduate specializing in victim advocacy and has already assisted dozens of people in similar situations. Mrs. Margaret, she told me recently, today I understand that I didn't lose a family. I gained a much bigger family. I have loyal friends, a partner who loves me for who I am, and above all, peace of mind. These are the stories that give me energy to keep going, even at 72 years old. Each transformed life, each broken chain, each protected child justifies all the suffering I endured. In 2022, our foundation celebrated 20 years. We had a simple celebration at a community center in Garland, Texas, just with the people who were part of our extended family, former members of the Jehovah's Witnesses and other high-control groups, families that had reconciled, professionals who collaborated with us. David gave an emotional speech. When I met Margaret more than 30 years ago, we were two castaways trying to rebuild our lives after having lost everything. Today, looking at this room full of free, happy, fulfilled people, I understand that life converts even our worst moments into blessings for others. He was right. What began as a personal tragedy, my disfellowshipping from the organization, transformed into a mission that impacted thousands of lives. And most importantly, it opened the way for other people not to have to go through alone what I went through. During the celebration, we kept a minute of silence for the victims we couldn't save, for the children who suffered while we fought to transform corrupt systems, for the people who didn't have the courage or opportunity to seek help. But we also celebrated the triumphs. Laws approved to protect minors in religious institutions, changes in internal policies of various denominations, mandatory reporting protocols implemented in Texas and other states. Hundreds of abusers have been held legally accountable. The work is far from finished. There's still much religious abuse happening, many children being hurt, many families being manipulated. But today, there exists a protection network that didn't exist when I was young. Today, victims have somewhere to run, have someone to listen to them, have support to start over. And it all began with a 35-year-old woman who refused to stay silent when she saw girls being abused. A woman who chose to read the Bible with her own eyes instead of accepting imposed interpretations. A woman who preferred to lose everything rather than be complicit with injustice. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see wrinkles, gray hair, marks of time, but I also see a woman at peace with herself. A woman who can sleep peacefully, knowing she did the right thing even when it cost dearly. My story isn't just about leaving a religion. It's about finding courage to question authorities, about protecting the vulnerable even when no one supports you, about maintaining faith in God even when we lose faith in human institutions. It's about discovering that truth really frees, not just those who discover it, but all those who are touched by that freedom. Today, looking back, I wouldn't change anything that happened, my dear ones. Each tear shed, each sleepless night, each moment of doubt and desperation was necessary to transform me into the person I am today. If I could go back in time and give advice to that Margaret of 35 years old who was discovering the organization's lies, I would tell her, "Daughter, it's going to be much harder than you imagine, but also much more rewarding. God is with you even when it seems He has moved away." I learned that questioning isn't lack of faith. It's a sign of mature faith. God isn't afraid of our questions. On the contrary, He gave us minds to think, hearts to feel, discernment to distinguish between right and wrong. I learned that no human organization, no matter how much it claims to represent God, is above questioning. Men are fallible, organizations are fallible. Only God is infallible, and He reveals Himself through His Word, not through organizational literature. I learned that true love isn't conditional. If someone stops loving you because you ask questions or because your beliefs change, then it was never true love. It was just convenience, conformity, social convenience. I learned that protecting innocent children is always more important than protecting organizational reputation. Any religious group that places its image above children's safety has lost any right to call itself Christian. I learned that truth doesn't need protection through silencing critics. If something is true, it resists questioning. If something that claims to be true is afraid of questions, then it's probably not true. I learned that God can use even our worst moments for greater purposes. My disfellowshipping, which at the time seemed like the end of the world, transformed into the beginning of a more genuine ministry than anything I did as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. For you who might be going through similar situations, whatever religion it may be, I leave some advice I learned with blood and tears. First, trust your own conscience. If something seems wrong, even if religious authorities say it's correct, investigate. God gave us discernment to use. Second, don't be afraid of questions. Questions are the beginning of wisdom. Any religious leader who discourages questioning is hiding something. Third, always remember that God is immensely greater than any institution. He doesn't reside in buildings or organizations, but in the heart of those who seek Him with sincerity. Fourth, if you discover you're involved in a manipulative religion, keep in mind that leaving is possible. It will be difficult, it will have a high cost, but freedom is priceless. Fifth, protect children with special attention, as they're unable to defend themselves. If you witness abuse, report it. If you witness manipulation, raise your voice. It's better to lose a religious position than to allow a child to suffer harm. I also learned that forgiveness is possible, although forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or tolerating abuse to continue. I've forgiven Brother James, Brother Daniel, even the organization that manipulated me for years. However, forgiving doesn't mean I'll stop warning others about the dangers I faced. Forgiveness freed me from the hatred that was consuming my interior, but it doesn't exempt me from the responsibility of protecting others from the same falsehoods and violations. Today, I enjoy a full life with genuine purpose, authentic relationships, and solid faith in God, not in an organization that pretends to represent Him, but in Him directly. I read His scriptures with freedom, pray with confidence, serve my fellow humans with joy. Truth truly frees us, my dear ones. But sometimes it's necessary to lose everything we thought was important to discover what really matters. One of the most valuable lessons I learned is that our identity can't depend on organizational approval. For years, my personal worth was based on what the elders thought of me, on the hours I preached, on the position I occupied in the organization. When I lost all that, I thought I was nobody. But I discovered that my value resides in being God's beloved daughter, not in titles or positions. I discovered that my identity is in what He says I am, not in what human organizations dictate. This discovery gave me confidence I had never felt before. I no longer need approval from religious leaders to feel valuable, nor organizational titles to have a purpose. My value is intrinsic, given by God, unbreakable. Another important lesson was the difference between religion and a personal relationship with God. For years, I confused both concepts. I believed that serving God meant serving the organization, that loving God meant loving the religious structure. Today I understand that God desires a personal and intimate relationship without intermediaries. He wants to talk with me directly through prayer, teach me directly through His scriptures, guide me directly through His Spirit. Religion can be a useful tool for fellowship and spiritual growth, but it should never become an end in itself. When religion becomes more important than the relationship with God, it stops serving Him and starts serving itself. I also learned about the importance of genuine community. When I left the organization, I thought I had lost my spiritual family forever. And in a certain way, that's what happened. But I gained something much better. I discovered that true community isn't based on doctrinal agreement but on unconditional love. It's not maintained through fear of punishment, but through genuine desire to be together. It doesn't demand absolute conformity but celebrates diversity within unity. The spiritual family I built after leaving the organization is stronger, deeper, more real than anything I experienced before. They're people who love me with my defects, who support me in moments of doubt, who celebrate my growth without trying to control me. One of the questions I'm asked most is, "Mrs. Margaret, aren't you afraid of being wrong? What if the Jehovah's Witnesses organization really is God's truth?" My answer is always the same. If God truly directed an organization that protects abusers and punishes those who denounce them, then that wouldn't be a God I would want to serve. But I know the God of the Bible. He is justice, love, truth, and that God would never ask us to remain silent before the suffering of innocents. Besides, over these years, I've seen so much evidence that the organization isn't directed by God. False prophecies, constant doctrinal changes, financial scandals, systematic abuse cover-ups. An organization truly directed by the Holy Spirit wouldn't present that pattern of errors and corruption. But even if I were wrong about the organization, and I'm sure I'm not, I still wouldn't regret the decision I made. I prefer to be wrong protecting children than to be right being complicit in abuse. Finally, I learned that our personal history, however painful it may be, can become a source of healing for others. For years, I tried to forget the trauma of being disfellowshipped, the pain of losing family and friends, the struggle to rebuild my life. Today, I understand that those experiences, however difficult they were, uniquely qualified me to help other people going through the same thing. I can't change my past, but I can use my story to transform other people's futures. Each scar became a credential. Each tear shed became a source of compassion to dry others' tears. Each sleepless night became the capacity to watch over those in crisis. This doesn't mean I romanticize suffering or believe God causes pain purposefully. It means I believe in God's capacity to transform even the worst situations into instruments of good. My life today is a living testimony that it's possible to start over even when we lose everything, that it's possible to find genuine purpose even after decades in deception, that it's possible to have solid faith in God even after losing faith in religious institutions. For any person who is reading or hearing this story and identifies with some part of it, I want you to know that you're not alone. There's an entire community of people who understand your pain, who celebrate your courage, who are ready to support your first steps toward freedom. The journey won't be easy, but it will be true. And in the end, you'll discover that truth, even being painful initially, is always worth it. If you made it this far, thank you for accompanying me on this painful but necessary journey. I know this story can be difficult to hear, especially for those who are still within controlling religious organizations. I didn't tell this story to attack sincere people who are still Jehovah's Witnesses. Many of them are good, dedicated people who really love God. I told it to warn about the dangers of religious control and to offer hope for those who are questioning. I also didn't tell it to lead anyone away from having faith. On the contrary, my experience showed me that true faith, that which is born from personal relationship with God, is much stronger and more liberating than any organized religion. Remember this. You are so much stronger than you think. The courage you need isn't somewhere else. It lies dormant within you, just waiting to be awakened. Never be afraid to ask questions. Never be afraid to follow the truth, no matter where it leads. And never be afraid to protect the innocent, even if it comes at a great cost. The truth may hurt at first, but in the end, it is what will set you free. You are not alone. We are here. A community of people who have walked this path is waiting to lift you up. If this story touched your heart, take action right now. Like this video to spread this message of hope. Subscribe to our channel to join us in the ongoing fight for freedom and truth. Comment below and tell me your story or where you're watching from. Every comment is an affirmation that we are not alone. And most importantly, share this video. Because out there, someone might need to hear these words more than ever. Thank you for being a part of this family. Together, we are an unshakable force. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.